Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the live stream. My name is Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society here in Australia. Love going live as often as possible, 3 times this week. It used to be every night, but now we're going for quality over quantity. I keep saying that. It wasn't even not there wasn't quality last time, but we just used to go live a lot more. But in terms of live streams, we're aiming to bring some awesome ones to you this year, this month, this week. And we're going live 3 times this week. First was Monday, of course, with just myself. Tuesday was with Luke McCarthy, the renowned author, writer, whiskey journalist. And tonight we go live with Heather Tillott, the head distiller of Sullivans Cove, probably the most renowned distillery in Australia. So it's going to be really great to have a chat to her about what it means to be a distiller, what her role entails at Sullivans Cove, a broader look at the whiskey industry, where the wins and losses are and successes as we see in the trade. So I appreciate you jumping in, everyone jumping in and having a chat tonight. I'm going to bring Heather in. Heather, welcome to the stream. Here we are. Hey, that worked. That worked. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to catch up with us this evening, 7 o'clock.
Absolute pleasure, Matt. It's awesome to be on. Thanks for having us on.
Awesome. No problem. Let's dig straight into it. First of all, when you're in sort of the waiting room down below, I can see just a small preview of what's going on. And I saw you were pouring a dram just before. So you're going to have to start with the classic question, what's in your glass?
What's in my glass? It is, I'm at my desk at the moment at the distillery. I'd planned to have us out on the mezzanine overlooking the still, but all the lights from the warehouse were just freaking out with the camera here. So we're in my boring office now, but on my desk is a 10-year-old French Oak X20 TD274. There was 122 bottles. So I've actually just pulled the last little bit of my bottle in my glass. So.
And one of those bottles made its way to your desk very thankfully.
Yeah. There's all sorts of things in here, trust me.
Yeah. I remember when I visited. It's like right. It's like a Willy Wonka's factory of weird things going on the shelf over there.
It is. Sometimes some of the staff come in here and just kind of like go the other way, like, that way. Sorry. Yeah. What can we find on Heather's back bar now today? What interesting things can we find?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit like my office sometimes. This side is sort of some work stuff, but over that side is the weird and wacky stuff.
Yeah, it's good.
Welcome and thank you so much for being here. I want to start by just getting an understanding of your background, but also of your role now in many ways, and what that looks like, where it all came about. You've got a background in winemaking, as I understand, and you've also we've been working with Sullivans Cove for about 5 years now. Am I getting that right?
That's correct, Matt. So I'm not originally Tasmanian, so I'm from the New South Wales South Coast, and there's a wee little wine region there, called the Shoalhaven Coast. So I was part of a really small boutique winery for a few years down there. Loved it. Every part of the little boutique winery business, so everything from vineyard work through production through to sales, and fell in love with the booze industry big time, and was intending when I moved down here to Tassie to just keep going with winemaking and just further into that. But realized pretty quickly that there was this thing going on in Tassie about spirits and distilling and whiskey. And just before I moved down, I discovered whiskey. I tasted Redbreast 15 and I was like, oh my God, my worldview is about to change. And moved down here and was just kind of exploring this new whiskey scene that I'd kind of figured out was existing down here, and came across Sullivan's one afternoon, did just a tasting flight, had a peek out the back, saw the still, fell in love with her. And I don't know, it would have been maybe a week or two later, I had a full-time job with the company, and I guess the rest is history as it is.
And where did you start in the, when you started with Sullivan's, where did you start?
I started in the bottling room, and I was doing some cellar door shifts as well, but very quickly ended up out the back. I was hired because they had a gap in the distilling team, and the best way to kind of quickly get to know a business and what they're about is to do cellar door and do bottling, I think.
And that gap in having a distiller, since 2015 has sort of almost been an ongoing problem for Australian distillers in the growth of the industry here. And that obviously 2015 would have been the year after, of course, the big 2014 win for Sullivans Cove with that French oak cask that I can safely say really put them on the map in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. The Australian industry, not just Tasmania, but the Australian spirits industry has exploded in the years, the more recent years. And, it's not like we had this bank of trained distillers just waiting for an industry explosion. It's something that had the skill set of the trained distillers in this country has grown with that industry explosion. So it's really interesting to see it happened quite organically, much like the early winemaking days of Australia. We're a famed and well-known wine industry as a nation. And in the early days, it was people in families learning from people, passing skills down. And in Tasmania, there's been a lot of that, and a lot of international influence where there's been a number of us, and the same nationally, where we've been able to spend time internationally with distillers in various distilling regions and learn the tricks and whatnot, and bring them back and figure out, using those skills, what that means in Australia with what we're doing. Because we're not making Scotch, we're making Tasmanian and Australian whiskey, and coupled with things like the IBD and local training opportunities, I think we've seen an amazing, huge growth in a very short space of time. And so we've got some ripper distillers in this country in a half a dozen years. It's great.
I noticed just then you sort of you did differentiate between, we have distillers and people making Tasmanian whiskey and making Australian whiskey. Is that a sort of a lead into regionality? Do you like to make that differentiation?
It depends on the context, to be honest. I mean, I think that there is regionality. I think that, you look at the wine industry and we've got loads of different regions that are all really unique, much like you would, you have in Italy or France or America. And I think there is absolutely scope for that with the spirits industry in Australia.
Right.
But I also think that as a nation, we need to stay united in our distilling culture as well. There is a very, there's a real just give it a go, let's figure it out as we go attitude that Australians in general have, and I love that. It's this awesome sort of innovative kind of gene that we have.
Yeah. It's the go gene, which has grown the trade a lot, and I think we've seen the growth of the number of distilleries in Australia and Tasmania, of course, really explode in the last 5 years. I think driven off that sort of, I guess we could give it a go kind of thing and see what comes of it.
Absolutely. And we don't have a couple hundred years of history in distilling that has led to, a really, really strict code of how we do things. I mean, Australia does actually have a really rich distilling history, but not in the sense of a really defined industry like Scotch does, or bourbon, for example, where there's a really particular set of rules around how we can do things and what we can call it, et cetera, et cetera. But because of that, we've got this, kind of looseness and this ability to be able to give things a go. There's nothing stopping you if you want to, I don't know, throw it in a jarrah barrel like we did. It's not oak. You could put it in a chest of drawers. You could put your spirit in a chest of drawers and call it whiskey after 2 years if there was anything left. We can do that in Australia. Can't do that in Scotland.
No. So on that point, I mean, there's a few questions coming in that I want to get to, including that comment from Miranda that said that perfectly. Excuse me while I steal your chat for that question, Heather.
Hi, Miranda.
Hi, Miranda. Marvelous Miranda is here. Good to see. On that point, though, I mean, do you think that's something that Australian distillers in general should be looking to do more, to play around with what would be not allowed in Scotch whiskey or Irish whiskey production?
100%. I think there's a fine line to walk, and I think on one hand we've got to just go for it. I mean, we're in our early stages of an industry, and I think still figuring out our identity. What makes us Australian in our spirits? What makes us Tasmanian in our spirits? What's our essence? And the only way to really get there is just to do everything. Go nuts, play, have fun, look back. What worked? What didn't? What did I love? What expressed who I am and our place and our ingredients the best, and figure all that out, work with the data, work with the liquid, and forge on forward and figure out that identity. So we got to do that on an individual basis, but also on a national, state and regional and national level. But at the same time, we also got to keep quality in mind. And so there's a really fine line there. But because of the stage we're at in our industry, it's really, really exciting to see us all go along that journey.
I mean, Sullivans Cove, one of those distilleries. Oh, I'm getting some feedback. One of those distilleries where the distillery didn't quite follow those rules, which a lot of distilleries did in the early days, and hence why your distillation setup, your stills are quite different from most others. And if you've toured Tassie distilleries, you often see, and I mean no disrespect by this, but you see replica after replica of the same sort of model that was copied from Macallan, which was copied from Lark, which was sort of then created the scene as it is today. That's not a bad thing per se. It's just a matter of fact. And then when you get to Sullivans Cove, you see the very strange stills and setup that you guys have. I'm going to quickly throw a photo up here of what it looks like in setup. That photo might be a little bit older. I should have taken some newer photos when I was down only just 2 weeks ago, but you know what? Hindsight. So
she's still as pretty as ever.
Still as pretty as ever. So tell us a little bit about the setup of these stills. I mean, how does that change and affect that's innovation within itself, even from an early days with Sullivans.
Yeah, we have a really oddball setup, and I love that, and I love that we've got this really unique still that, you know, what you're looking at is what originally was actually a direct replica of a Charente Alembic, which, if you know your brandy, is what you've got to use if you want to make cognac. So we've started making single malt whiskey with a cognac still. That's a bit different. So it's oddball, it's from left field, but I love that. And I think that has been part of our story from the get-go, is looking at single malt from a completely different angle. And the still itself.
But also using that to make things
like brandy. Oh my God.
There we go.
Turned out all right too, can I just say? Happy moments. Our spirit is really robust, and it's got that really, really rich, thick, oily nature, which in part is to do with our ingredients and our process, but also to do with our still. If you've had the pleasure of hanging out in cognac, that's a very defining feature of their new make and their spirit, is this gorgeous kind of briny thing, and that's Sullivans Cove spirit just in spades. And there's a richness to it. It's robust. You know, we've got a lot of reflux there in that system. We make those vapors work pretty hard to get up and over into the worm tub. So on one hand, we've got this really light spirit because we're working it hard. You know, it's a really low, slow distillation with a lot of reflux. You can see there with the shape, there's this big old onion neck and quite a tall neck before the line for a pot of its size. And on the other end, you've got a worm tub, which gives you this really like meaty, robust spirit. So it's a really interesting balance. It's kind of like a yin yang thing, and it gives you a really, really cool spirit that, we attribute in large part to the still. Yeah.
There's a great question here from Jesse Morgan, who says, you've mentioned a transferable skill set. Are there certain professions that you believe would hold those transferable skills relevant for distillers and innovators in Australian whiskey? That's a good question, Jesse.
Totally, great question. I think anyone who's been making booze, totally transferable skill set. You're using your nose, you're moving liquids from A to B, using pumps, hoses, cleaning most of the time, let's face it, doing heavy barrel work, things like that. So that's the obvious one. But I also think, and this is left field, but I feel like distillers, we're like plumbers with good noses. You're moving liquids, you're using pipes and valves and everything, and you use your nose. So
plumbers with good noses. I'm going to use that one.
Nose. Yeah.
I've heard plumbers with good noses, and I've also in the past heard a distiller is a glorified cleaner. And I've heard
I'll attest to that.
Yeah. I mean, she meant it. The person who said that meant it in a good way, but it was like, it's not a bad thing. There's a lot of cleaning.
You know, the first day I worked in a winery, my boss at the time said, you know, this is 95% cleaning. Do you still want the job? I was like, yeah, I love cleaning. I'm cool with that. And it's true. You know, you just make a mess you get skanky and you clean it up over and over again. It's the same here. I mean, as anyone who's seen the inside of a pot still after a wash run knows, she gets a little fresh.
Yeah. It gets a bit in there. Yeah. And there we go. I think Hem's plumber with a sensitive nose wouldn't last very long usually.
Yeah, it's a very particular skill.
Very, very particular skill indeed. So I want to talk a little bit more about the wider whiskey trade in Australia. Now, you've been obviously two things here. You've been shaping. How do I put this? We haven't really seen. Have we seen much of what you've laid down yet? Because I'm guessing we haven't in terms of because of the age of Sullivans Cove releases.
No, there was a pilot cask or two that came out, and they were cellar door bottlings, but no, not in our core range or double casks. No.
And for those
probably
playing
another 5 years or so.
Yeah, another 5 years, yeah. And for those playing along at home, the pilot cask series are the sort of cellar door experimentations that you can find.
Yeah, so we've had a few really interesting bottlings come through the pilot cask label, and they're generally the experimental sort of things, because of course yes, we've been going for 25 years, and a large part of my role is making sure that we continue putting our essence into the bottle. As it's kind of come to me. So I'm not about to rock the boat too crazy yet, but we still have to innovate and play around and do bits and bobs. So we've experimented and filled a few little casks like the 20s and 50s. It's not our bag. We did it for a short time, kind of like a big R&D experiment. And we put a few of them through the pilot cask label, which is really fun.
Gary says here, everyone about the pilot cask.
Sorry, Gary.
Secret. Yeah, sorry, Gary. I can hear his keys jangling from Launceston right now. So that's taking that experimentation aside, it's kind of interesting that in the 5 years you've been distilling now, you've been shaping the spirit for the future of Sullivans Cove, and I guess you would have learned a lot over the years of what works and what doesn't in many ways, from spirit sensory analysis, from understanding your spirit, understanding the cut points, understanding the worm tub, all that kind of thing. What do you see then as crucial skills that distillers in Australia, as you said, it is a different way of making whiskey. What do you see some of the crucial skills that distillers in Australia should have and use?
I think having a good palate is vital. It's something that some people just kind of have a bit more of a knack for, but it is something that you can improve on any nose in the world. You can train your palate, and you can train it for a particular task like distilling. But you need to be able to have that analytical kind of brain as well. So it's this really, you're walking the line between art and science at all times. You're using your soft skills. You're using things that, your therapist in your mindfulness class tells you to do to stay in the moment. And also then keeping, loads of numbers and data and spreadsheets and all the rest of it to interpret what your palate, your nowness is telling you. And, what is it telling you about what happened 20 years ago in the field, in the fermentation, in the stills, what the barrels were doing, all the rest of it. And, looking back at an older spirit, but what is it telling you about what's happening on the still now? Should the ferment have been 2 degrees cooler, for example? And so to have that kind of mindset is, I think, quite particular. If you can be in that space of soft skill and hard mechanical skill all at once, is very particular skill set.
You could almost argue that combining subjective and objective.
Yeah, for real. And I think that, I know this it's not as, it's quite subjective, but I think that to be good at any craft that has that kind of balance between the objective and the subjective, that you've got to kind of be in that space, there's no room for ego. And that could be a controversial comment, but I think that distilling, winemaking, beer making, you kind of think going into it that it's this sorcery, this wizardry magical job, where you get to, cackle over cauldrons and, make this wonderful magical liquid that we all froth over in bars and whatnot. And it is, but it's also a job, and it is dirty, it stinks, it doesn't always smell as good as the glass, I tell you that. It's dirty, it stinks, it's hard work, it's hard physical work rolling around 350 kilo weights on racks, and it's monotonous in the sense that you repeat these things day in and day out. It's beautiful, but it's a job. At the same time, there's a balance there, and I think it's hard sometimes for people to think, oh, I want to be a distiller, it's going to be amazing, you know, I'm going to be dancing around, tiptoeing through the tulips with my nose in a glass for 24 hours a day. It's a job. We all got to do it. We got to make the whiskey, and it takes a lot of hard work and dedication and very particular sort of discipline to make it. So, I mean, I love our team of distillers here. We've got an amazing team, and they get that.
Yeah.
I love being, you know, having them as our crew, and yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. So on that point, then, if that's sort of some of the most important, if that's some of the most important role of a distiller, where do you see, like, what do you see as some of the most important growth points for Australian whiskey? Then I know that's a really broad point, but if I also sort of look at sort of the last 5 years, I'd say Australian whiskey has matured a lot in the last 5 years. It's come a long way. So if you were to use your sort of distiller's magic 8-ball and looking at sort of the next 5 to 10 years, what would that look like then? And not just maybe Tasmanian, but Australian whiskey.
I completely agree about how rapid our industry has grown. And sorry, Richard Matthews. Richard Matthews has just done a comment, and he's one of our wonderful distillers, and he's saying that you don't have to kick me out of bed to go to work. That's good.
That's a compliment. Hey.
But yes, I honestly, it's astounding if you think just the last 5 years where us as a group of distillers nationally has come to is astounding. All the experiments that people have just rapidly done and learned from and improved with every single release is astounding, and it is something to be immensely proud of. Where to next? I think we're in a really interesting phase now, is that we're seeing the spectrum of style, of scale, approach, business approach, branding of our industry really flesh out. So we're getting, you know, bigger companies coming on the line, you know, bigger blends coming on board, and you know, we've still got a really, really premium end of the spectrum as well, but we're seeing everything in the middle come up as well now. That's super exciting. Yeah. We need that to have longevity as an industry putting forward a really, really consistently good product that has an economy in and of itself that makes sense and that is, you know, feasible for the long term. We need that to broaden out, and we're seeing it just pop up now, and I find that really, really exciting. I think it can be intimidating, and I think honestly we just need to keep, you know, supporting each other and celebrating each other's successes and be kind to each other. I think that's what we need to do now.
I think I'll totally agree with you on the whole sort of the trade in Australia has diversified quite a bit, in that we're seeing a lot of the smaller players, and we're seeing also a lot of the really big scale coming online. And I think that's really exciting. And of course, Sullivans Cove as a distillery has definitely already carved out its space within that spectrum. And it's even from the release we saw this week, which was, you know, vanished in a flash. So it's, you know, we've seen that, and I think that's something to be celebrated rather than worried about. And the same with blending. I mean, do you see, just going on to that point of blending though, you sort of mentioned it just before, do you see sort of a blended industry as something that needs to grow here? Do you see that as something that, obviously you guys do blending with in-house already, both with your double cask and whatnot, but do you see that as something that needs to grow in Australia as a blended market?
I do, big time. Again, I think it is just something that naturally we need to have to kind of broaden out the spectrum of our industry and balance it out. We've come along as this industry that's predominantly single malt and single cask. So much of Australian whiskey single cask, which is really cool, and it's so niche. It's so Australian. It's great. It's become a globally recognizable Australian thing, and that's really cool. But to make it have longevity in a way that makes sense for our distilling economy, we actually need the bigger blends as well. We need there to be a balance out, and I'm excited by that. I can't wait for some of this stuff to come on board and have a balanced sort of industry. That excites me.
I was talking to someone recently about blending, and who's quite knowledgeable in the Australian industry about blending whiskey, and one of the comments that was made was, yes, it would be great to do more blending, but we don't have the history nor local expertise for such a thing. And that's a really valid point in that.
Yeah, totally.
The blenders like the Shivers Group and Johnny Walker and whatnot, it's often family lineage of blenders even today, and they come up and blend whiskey to an exact specification and even leaving their imprint on certain releases. We don't have that sort of history, but we also don't have that kind of expertise really locally to support that as yet. Do you think that will change, or has changed, or is changing?
I think it is changing, but I think it will change because it's necessary. I think it's a mix again of figuring it out, because we've got really unique spirit in Australia, and across all the categories of gin, brandy, whiskey, etc. We've got really unique spirit, and we need to figure out how our spirit works best with its own kind to blend. So we have to figure that out. We've got to do the hard yards there, but also there are so many parts of the world that have been doing it for so long. So it's a balance again of figuring out what it means for us, but also learning from people who've been doing it for a very long time and are doing an amazing job at it.
Yeah.
And I think that's just where we have to go. We learn, and then figure out and apply what it looks like for us.
So let's just move over to wood for a second. Something we constantly hear from distillers is that access to great wood, access to quality wood, access to constant supply of good wood, and I'm talking mostly specifically locally, is becoming more and more of an issue, more and more of a concern, I guess, outside of sourcing from, say, Heaven Hill or Buffalo Trace or whatnot. Is that something that is on your radar, because it's sort of the second part of once you've distilled it, it needs to go somewhere. So is that something that's on your radar in terms of what that looks like, how that's evolving?
Yeah, well, certainly, as you say, I mean, it's not whiskey without wood. So yeah. Our wood policy is very, very large part of my job, and it's really important to us. So we have quite a tight policy of where our barrels are sourced, how they're treated, what's been in them, et cetera, et cetera. And that, of course, is the same for any distiller, because you can't have whiskey without wood. But I think we have this amazing advantage in that we are a nation that loves a barrel. I mean, we love a bit of wine. There's plenty of barrels in Australia, and I think that it's underutilized and underrealized at this stage. So I think the synergies between the other booze industries in Australia has a lot of room for movement and for growth.
Yeah, awesome.
I mean, I'm personally, and at Sullivans, we're not ultra worried. I think we've got great relationships with our suppliers, and continue to further those relationships, because it is such an important part of your process. If you don't get barrels right.
And what are you're mostly feeling into a mixture of ex-American and ex-French oak, is that right still, or?
That's correct. So we're filling a mixture of, obviously, the bourbon casks. They're coming from the States. So ex-bourbon cask, first fills, and we're filling majority French oak, ex-tawny, Australian fortifieds, and some American oak as well. And if you're familiar with our core range, you'll have seen the American oak tawnies coming online, which are delicious.
And the refills as well.
Refills as well, absolutely. Yep. Refill casks are great.
Hashtag team refill. No, we know we're a big fan of team refill over at the society, so we've got a lot of members who know and appreciate good refills when we see them.
Yeah, it's really, sorry. Oh, I just want to talk about refills.
I want to hear more about refills. Do it.
My God. Refills. The thing I love most about refills in Australia is we're so used to a spirit style in Australia, and we've become known for it globally as well. That, and I kind of like this too, but you get punched on one side of the face with oak and punched on the other side with a pre-fill, like tawny or bourbon or whatever, particularly fortified. They're big, gutsy kind of Aussie fortified wines. And then, and that's a really beautiful, intense thing. But then if you use the refill cask, so use it again, you're not getting punched in the face with pre-fill. And all of a sudden you've got this gorgeous expression, a naked, raw expression of your spirit. And that's your house style, your fingerprint, your identity in the market, and in the spirits world. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So it's tricky to get it right. You've got to have you're seen. You can't hide behind a pre-fill. You know, you've got to get the balance between oak and spirit right. But it's a beautiful kind of canvas to paint a picture of your spirit on. Very exciting.
One of my favorite examples of refill is like old refill whiskies, where you get to taste like these, 18, 20, 22-year-old Scotch whiskies that have had that time in a refill cask. And it's like, they've got maturity, but they've still got some spirit-driven elements to them. That for me is like the perfect whiskey. I'm just going to throw up a question from Hems, who writes, okay, probably a dumb question. There's no such thing, Hems, so don't worry about that. But are there any Australian/native woods that lend themselves to whiskey barrels?
Not that we've found yet.
Okay.
There's a number of distilleries where one of them playing around with native timbers. One of the classic things about a native Australian timber is they're so resinous. They are so resinous, they're really intense flavors. I mean, you think eucalyptus and jarrah and whatnot, they've got a lot of flavor in there. Red gum, exactly. So there's loads of room for continued experiments, and it's great. It's lots of fun, but not yet have we found something that is really good for long-term aging. Oak is great because it doesn't have those crazy resins. You don't feel like you're sucking on a piece of pine, and it's porous but not too porous. So it doesn't leak loads. It holds the liquid in, but it is porous enough to get that oxygen movement through. Whereas a lot of Australian timbers are either really too soft, really too hard to cooper. You get your coopers cursing you, or they leak. They're too brittle. They won't breathe enough, or they'll breathe too much. So it's really tricky finding a timber that's going to hold spirit for a long time without, you're losing your, hard distilled spirit. You put so much effort into. But it's a lot of fun. We need to be doing more experiments, and it's great.
Yeah. Patrick Bruckner asks to HT, which is Heather Tillott, average maturation time at Sullivans Cove? ?
Average for our single casks would be, I don't know, I want to say maybe 13, 14 years. I think the majority of what we're releasing single cask range at the moment is between 10 and 20. Most of it in the core range would be around the 12, 13, 14 years. Yeah.
Fantastic. Just to finish with, what are you most looking forward to personally at Sullivans Cove? What's the next sort of project or something you've been working on, or something you've seen recently that you're like 2, 3, 4 years from now, or even this year, that you're really excited by?
Well, this year I'm really excited to play with the ABV of our double cask. So we've, it's historically been a lower ABV in our core range, but we're at the point now where we're thinking, you know what, I think let's rise it. Let's get each batch. Sorry?
It did move a couple of years ago. Am I getting that right? It went from sort of 40 to 46 or something?
That's correct. It went from 40 to 45.
45, sorry, yep.
But with all of our other core ranges and single cask releases, it's a variable ABV. It's usually around the same sweet spot, but we do an ABV trial and determine like where it's going to sit. So sometimes you might see on the side tag, it might be like 46.8 or 47.2 or 47.5 or 48.2, and that's designed. We found a sweet spot for that spirit. We thought, you know what, let's do it for the double cask. So chances are it'll be a little bit higher, but we're just opening it up to each batch to tell us where it sits best, which is the approach we've got with our single cask. So it only makes sense. So I'm really excited that will be coming online later in this year.
Well, there's a sneak peek. And I really appreciate you taking some time out to catch up with us this evening, Heather. Really appreciate it.
Total pleasure, Matt. It's been great.
There'll be some awesome questions coming through, which Heather can have a look at, because she'll have the link to these to the stream, obviously post. But we've had some great questions come through from members tonight, so thank you so much. And hoping we can catch up again in Sydney or in Tassie, whenever that is. That'll be great.
Me too.
Before we wrap up, I just want to let everyone know that, of course, that's the end of our lives for this week. We're going to be back live for part 2. If you remember, before I go on to that, actually, if you remember last year, I managed to sit down. Last year was 2020. 2019, I managed to sit down with Ewan Campbell, who is the head of whiskey for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and he's the one who looks after all the crazy casks and experiments that we do at the society. And there's the thumbnail of our YouTube clip that we did with him a while ago with Dramside Chat with Ewan Campbell. Of course, Ewan is coming back to join us again next Tuesday night. So tune in next Tuesday for Live with SMWS. I just want to again thank Heather for taking her time out of her Thursday evening, where she could be at home right now, but instead she's here with us at the Society. So I really appreciate it.
Total pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me on board. It's been really great.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon.
See you, everybody.